Welcome to the Deck Dive. We're the show that takes a whole stack of different sources, articles, deep research, history, finance stocks, and really pulls out the strategic knowledge you need to be genuinely informed.
And today, yeah, the source stack is, well, it's huge. We're not just talking about basic mortgages and rent calculation.
No, not at all.
We're going deep, looking at the core strategies, the high finance stuff from Wall Street, the really critical history behind American housing policy over centuries, and, the practical nuts and bolts of actually managing properties successfully.
Yeah, our mission today is pretty ambitious, I think. We want to move way past the sort of surface level assumptions most people have about real estate.
Right.
We're trying to uncover those deep, sometimes hidden drivers of real estate value, the things that really matter for the savvy investor. Everything from, how you structure that first deal with leverage, all the way to how city planning from like 100 years ago shapes the neighborhoods we invest in today.
And that synthesis is really the goal, isn't it? Connecting these things that seem totally separate, like personal wealth philosophy, super detailed rehab cost lists, how to handle legal risks, the real story behind the 2008 crisis, even architectural history segregation.
Exactly.
Understanding how those pieces fit together, that's what gives you the edge. That's what turns a decent investor into a truly great one.
Okay, let's start at the absolute beginning then, the foundation. Our sources hammer this home as rule number one. You absolutely must internalize the difference between an asset and a liability, and your goal has to be acquiring assets.
It sounds almost too simple, right?
Yeah.
But it's the cornerstone of financial literacy, and it's shocking how many people get it wrong. Rich people focus on acquiring assets, things that actually put money into their pockets month after month. The poor and middle class, though, they often acquire liabilities that, society or culture has told them are assets.
Like the family home,
Right.
right? The classic example.
Exactly. If the thing you buy takes money out of your pocket every month, it's a liability, period. Doesn't matter what your neighbor thinks or what the bank tells you. It's about the cash flow direction.
Yeah, the big house, the fancy car, often seen as success symbols, but they're usually huge cash drains, mortgage interest, insurance, property taxes, upkeep.
Right. And what's really striking is that this isn't about, lack of education or professional success. We see this critical gap even among highly educated people, doctors, lawyers, engineers.
Yeah.
They might be fantastic at making money,
Yeah, high earners.
but they still struggle financially because they never learned how to actually manage it. They lack what the sources call financial aptitude.
So they're specialists in their field, but generalists or maybe even novices when it comes to personal finance.
Precisely. They master the skills to work hard, earn a good salary. But nobody taught them how to handle that money effectively, how to use investments, to crucially make their money work hard for them through things like passive income.
And it seems like a lot of this comes down to psychology, doesn't it? Emotions driving decisions rather than logic.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost entirely behavioral. For most people, money decisions get hijacked by emotions. Fear of missing out, wanting to keep up with the Joneses, you could call it greed or envy, or just anxiety about losing money.
So instead of thinking, okay, what's the actual cash flow impact of this purchase, they react.
They react. They buy the big house for the status, the car for the feeling, without really analyzing the long-term liability it represents. It's this inability to face the financial truth logically that keeps people stuck in reactive mode instead of being strategic about their money.
Okay, so if we take that assets first mindset and apply it to real estate, we immediately hit on what makes it kind of unique as an investment class. The sources call it the triple play of returns.
Yeah, the triple play. It's powerful because you can win in three different ways, often all at the same time.
Okay, break those down.
First, you've got appreciation. Simple enough, the property's value goes up over time. Second, and this is a big one, debt pay down. Your tenants are actually paying down your mortgage principal for you.
That's huge.
And third, positive cash flow. That's the actual money left in your pocket each month after you've paid all the bills. Mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, everything. It's unearned income.
That debt paydown piece, that's the one that really grabs new investors, I think. You buy this thing, this asset, and someone else pays off the loan for you just for the privilege of living there.
It's pure leverage in action. And it works because, historically speaking, rents tend to go up over the long term, often faster than inflation. So that positive cash flow piece usually gets stronger over time, too.
Okay, but let's push back on that a little. Leverage, using debt, it's powerful, but it's also risky, right? It's a double-edged sword.
Definitely.
If the tenant pays the mortgage, great. But if they leave or stop paying, Suddenly, those costs are all yours. So how does a smart investor manage that risk?
You manage it through really disciplined due diligence upfront and by having strong relationships with your lenders. See, leverage adds a fixed cost every single month, that mortgage payment.
Right.
If you bought a property, all cash, no debt, your holding costs are pretty low, taxes, insurance, maybe some utilities. But with a loan, that payment is there, whether the place is rented or vacant. 0% occupancy still means 100% of the mortgage payment is due.
And lenders know this, obviously.
Oh, they know it intimately. That's why their underwriting process is designed to make sure you can handle that risk. They typically look at it in 3 stages, the 3 C's of lending, basically.
Okay, what are the 3 C's?
First is credit. They need to see you've handled debt responsibly in the past. That means a good credit score, low debt-to-income ratio, things like that.
Standard stuff.
Right. Second is equity. They want you to have skin in the game. That's the down payment, usually 20%, maybe 25% for investment properties. That buffer protects them if the value dips a bit, and it shows you're committed. It's your safety cushion.
Makes sense.
And third, specifically for investment properties, is cash flow. They'll analyze the property itself. Does the expected rent realistically cover the proposed mortgage payment, plus taxes, insurance, and usually a vacancy factor? They need to see that the property could basically pay for itself.
So understanding that leverage and cash flow dynamic is crucial. Now, how do we measure if a potential investment is actually good before we pull the trigger? Let's start simple, with ROI, return on investment.
Yeah, ROI is kind of the baseline. It's easy to grasp. You're just measuring the annual return you get based on the actual cash you put into the deal.
How you calculate it simply.
The basic formula is your annual cash flow. So take your monthly profit after all expenses, multiply by 12, and then divide that by your repairs. Total initial investment. That initial investment includes your down payment, all your closing costs, and any money you spend on immediate repairs or rehab to get it rent ready.
Can you give us a quick example with numbers?
Sure, let's say you buy a place,
Yeah.
and between the down payment, closing costs, and maybe $10 in fixing it up, you've put in a total of $50,000 cash out of your pocket.
Okay.
And after paying the mortgage, taxes, insurance, setting aside money for future repairs, everything, you're left with $500 in positive cash flow every single month.
Right.
So $500 a month times 12 months is $6,000 a year. You take that $6,000 and divide it by your initial $50,000 cash investment. That gives you 0.12 or a 12% ROI.
12%. That's a clear benchmark. It tells you how hard your initial cash is working.
Exactly. And in that example, it also means theoretically you'd get all your initial cash back in about 8.5 years just from the cash flow alone, not even counting appreciation or debt paydown.
That's powerful. Now let's talk about a metric that gets thrown around a lot, maybe sometimes misused, the cap rate or capitalization rate. Why is it useful, but maybe not the whole picture for an individual investor using leverage?
Okay, the cap rate, it's calculated differently. You take the property's net operating income, or NOI.
And NOI is?
NOI is your gross rental income minus all your operating expenses. Taxes, insurance, property management, repairs, utilities, if you pay them before you account for your mortgage payment. So it ignores the debt.
Okay.
And you divide that NOI by the property's purchase price. That gives you the cap rate. Big institutional buyers often like cap rate because they might buy properties with less debt or maybe all cash, or they figure they can refinance easily. So for them, it's a quick measure of the property's raw, unleveraged yield.
So if I'm an individual using a typical 75% or 80% loan, the cap rate doesn't actually tell me what my CAF return on my invested dollars is?
Precisely. It totally ignores your biggest expense, which is usually the mortgage payment
Right.
and interest. So where cap rate is useful for you is, one, comparing similar properties in the same market. If 2 identical buildings are for sale and one has a much lower cap rate, it might be overpriced relative to its income potential. And crucially, you use the market cap rate to estimate what the property might be worth when you eventually sell it. You project future NOI, divide by the expected market cap rate at that future time, and that gives you an estimated future sale price. You need that future sale price to calculate the really important metrics.
Right. So relying only on cap rate is a mistake, especially with leverage. What are the metrics we should be focusing on alongside cap rate to judge the quality of a leveraged deal?
You need the metrics that look at the whole picture, including your actual cash invested, your actual cash flow after debt, and the eventual profit when you sell. Those are primarily your cash-on-cash return.
Which is similar to the ROI we just calculated.
Very similar, yeah. It's your annual pre-tax cash flow divided by your total cash invested. It measures the return on the money you actually put in. Then there's the internal rate of return, or IRR.
That one sounds more complex.
It is. The IRR is probably the most comprehensive metric. It considers all the cash flows over the entire holding period, your initial negative cash flow, the investment, all the positive or negative monthly cash flows, and the final big positive cash flow when you sell. It calculates the single discount rate that makes the net present value of all those cash flows equal to zero. Essentially, it's your total annualized rate of return, accounting for the time value of money.
Okay, so IRR gives you the big picture over the whole life of the investment.
Right. And then there's also the equity multiple. That's simpler. It's just the total cash you get back, all cash flow plus sale proceeds, divided by the total cash you put in. So if you put in 50K and get back 150K total over time, your equity multiple is 3x. It tells you how many times over you got your initial investment back.
So it's really cash on cash, IRR, and equity multiple, using cap rate mainly to help estimate the future sale price that truly determine if a deal is good for you as a leveraged investor.
Exactly. Those are the numbers that should drive your decision on what price to pay and whether the investment meets your goals, not just the cap rate alone.
All right, let's shift from theory and measurement into actionable strategies for building a real estate business. If someone wants to scale up quickly, maybe without having to save up a huge new down payment for every single property, the BRRR method comes up constantly. Buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. Let's unpack that refinance step that seems to be the engine.
The refinance is absolutely the key to the repeat part. It's how you make the strategy scalable. So you buy a property that needs work, usually below market value. That's the buy.
Right.
Then you fix it up the rehab. You add value through forced depreciation. Then you place a tenant the rent. Now, because you've significantly increased the property's value through the rehab, it should appraise for much more than you initially paid, plus the rehab costs. That new higher value is called the after repair value, or ARV. So the refinance step is where you go back to a lender, typically after the property is rehabbed and stabilized with a tenant, and you get a new loan based on that higher ARV. Often you can get a loan for, say, 70–75% of the ARV.
And because your total cost, purchase plus rehab, was hopefully less than 70–75% of the ARV?
Exactly. You can potentially pull out all of your original cash investment, maybe even more sometimes, tax-free because it's loan proceeds. That recovered capital is then used for the down payment and rehab on the next deal. That's the repeat.
So BRRRR really hits two birds with one stone. It gets your initial capital back out to redeploy, and it dramatically boosts your ROI on the original property, right?
Oh, massively. Think about our earlier ROI example. You put in 50K, got 6K a year cash flow for a 12% ROI. But if you do a cash-out refinance and pull a $50K back out, your invested capital in that deal drops to zero, or maybe just a few $1,000s you left in.
Right.
If you're still making 6Ks a year cash flow, but you only have, say, $5,000 of your own money left in the deal, your cash-on-cash ROI skyrockets. It could be over 100%. That's how sophisticated investors use debt strategically to accelerate wealth building. They recycle the same capital over and over.
And the sources mention that combining this BRRR strategy with properties that generate really high cash flow, like maybe short-term rentals or house hacks, can let you build up capital for the next deal much, much faster than just trying to save from a regular job.
Yeah, it can create the self-funding loop. But, and this is a big but, the success of BRRRR, or any strategy really, isn't just about clever financing. It depends heavily on external factors. You need a good market, and you need reliable tenants.
We always hear location, location, location. But what does that mean specifically from an investor's viewpoint? What makes a market have high demand?
You're looking for strong economic fundamentals. Are there jobs being created? Are wages decent and growing? Is the local economy diversified? Or is it all dependent on one industry that could collapse?
Right.
As an investor, you generally want to own property where demand is high and growing. That high demand does two things for you. It pushes up your property's value appreciation and allows you to charge higher rents, usually with lower vacancy rates because lots of people want to live there.
And the sources highlighted one really specific, actionable tip for finding areas with potentially very stable tenants, buying near hospitals.
That's a fantastic filter. Seriously. Think about it. Major hospitals and medical centers employ a lot of people. Nurses, doctors, technicians, support staff, administrators. These are generally stable, well-paying jobs.
Professional tenants.
Professional tenants, exactly. Buying near a major medical hub gives you a built-in, continuous stream of potential renters who are likely to be reliable, pay on time, and maybe stay longer. It doesn't guarantee success, nothing does, but it significantly stacks the odds in your favor regarding tenant quality and low vacancy.
Okay, so you found a good market, maybe near a hospital, you've bought the property using a smart strategy like BRRR. Now comes the operational phase. And this is where deals can fall apart if you're not careful, especially with the rehab. If you're flipping, speed is absolutely critical.
Time is money, literally, when you're flipping.
Yeah.
Every single day you hold that property, you're paying interest on the loan, taxes, insurance, utilities.
Yeah.
Those holding costs eat directly into your profit margin.
Yeah.
So operational excellence in flipping means managing the 3 Ps relentlessly. People, your contractors, process your timeline, your scope of work, and profit nailing your cost estimates and sticking to the budget. Getting those rehab costs right before you even buy is probably the single most important factor.
And that means really digging into the guts of the property, right?
Mhm.
Especially older homes. What are some of those hidden bombshells investors need to look out for during inspection?
Oh, plumbing is a huge one. Massive potential cost. If you're looking at a house built, say, before the 1960s or 70s, you have to know what kind of pipes are in there. Old cast iron drain lines can crack or collapse. Galvanized steel water lines corrode from the inside out, restricting flow and eventually leaking. Lead pipes are obviously a health hazard.
And replacing that stuff isn't cheap.
Not even close. Replacing a main sewer line or repiping an entire house can easily cost $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 or more. You didn't budget for that. Your entire profit on a flip could just vanish. Same goes for electrical old knob and tube wiring, undersized panels, foundation issues, roof problems. You need thorough inspections.
The sources even got into specific budgeting details for things like drywall and flooring.
Yeah, which is helpful. Like for drywall work, if it's a big job patching lots of holes, hanging new sheets, the advice was if the estimate is over, say, $500, don't just use your general handyman. Bring in a dedicated drywall crew. They're specialists. They're usually way faster, and the finish quality is better. It often ends up being worth a slightly higher hourly rate because they get it done quickly and correctly, which saves you time and holding costs. And for flooring, even cheap stuff like vinyl plank or linoleum, always add 10% to your square footage calculation for waste.
10% for cuts and mistakes.
Exactly. Especially in older houses where walls are never perfectly square, you'll have angled cuts, weird corners. If you only order the exact square footage, you will run short. Then you're scrambling back to the store. Maybe the dye lot doesn't match. It causes delays and headaches. Just budget the 10% waste factor up front.
Makes sense. Okay, so getting the rehab right is critical, but running the operation, whether it's a flip or a rental, relies heavily on your team. How do you build the right team around you?
Your team is everything. Your agent, your property manager, if you use one, your lender, your go-to contractors. They're your operational defense.
Yeah.
For agents, ideally, find one who already works with investors. They understand the need for speed. They know how to analyze deals based on numbers, not just emotions.
And if you can't find an experienced investor agent,
Then look for someone with the right attitude. Someone hungry, driven, detail-oriented, and willing to learn the investor side of things. You can teach a motivated agent what you need.
finding good, reliable contractors, that feels like the hardest part for a lot of people. What's the best way to source them? Avoid getting ripped off.
Referrals. Always start with referrals from people you already trust who are active in the market. Ask your investor-friendly agent, ask your property manager, ask your lender. They see who performs consistently, who shows up on time, who stays on budget.
Good advice.
And then, when you get bids, don't just look at the total price. Ask for a breakdown, especially labor hours for specific tasks.
Ah, like the door example in the sources.
Exactly. Ask 3 contractors, how many hours will it take your crew to hang these 5 interior doors? If one says 4 hours and another says 20 hours, you immediately learn something about their efficiency, their honesty, or maybe just how much padding is in their quote. Use specific tasks to compare apples to apples.
Smart. Okay, let's talk property managers. For buy and hold investors aiming for passive income, the PM is probably the most crucial team member. What separates a great PM from just an okay one?
A great PM is proactive and systems-driven. They should be doing regular property inspections, not just when someone moves out, to catch issues early and make sure the tenant is respecting the property. They need meticulous record-keeping lease files complete, rent payments tracked accurately.
Okay.
And they need to be obsessed with minimizing vacancy time. How quickly can they get a unit turned around, cleaned, repaired, painted, and back on the market after a tenant leaves? That make-ready time is critical to your cash flow.
Makes sense. Less vacancy is more income.
Right. And here's a key point from the sources. A truly great property manager understands that their primary goal should be keeping the property occupied with good tenants, rather than trying to squeeze every last dollar out of rent increases.
Interesting. Why is that?
Because vacancy is the biggest killer of cash flow. Aggressively raising rents might look good on paper for a month or two, but if it causes a good tenant to leave and the unit sits empty for a month or two while you find someone else, you've likely lost more money than you gained from the rent hike. Consistent, stable occupancy with gradual market rate increases is usually much more profitable in the long run. A great PM gets that balance right.
That's a really important alignment point. Okay, last piece of the operational puzzle. Getting the right tenants in the first place through solid screening, especially for long-term rentals. What are the absolute must-haves for qualifying someone?
Non-negotiables. First, income. The applicant's total household income needs to be verifiable, and it should be at least 3 times the monthly rent. Some landlords even push for 3.5x or 4x, especially in higher-cost areas. This ensures they have enough cushion to pay rent and cover their other life expenses.
3 times rent minimum. Got it. What else?
Credit score. You need a baseline to show they generally pay their bills. A minimum score of, say, 600 is common, though you might adjust based on the property class and market. Below that often indicates significant issues with managing financial obligations.
Okay, income and credit. Check the financial boxes. What about their history as a renter?
Critically important. You need positive, verifiable references from all of their landlords for at least the past 5 years. Not just the current one. They might want to get rid of a bad tenant. Call the previous ones, too.
Good point.
If they have gaps in their rental history they can't explain. Or if a previous landlord refuses to give a reference or gives a negative one, those are huge red flags. And finally, adhere to occupancy limits, usually 2 people per bedroom. Check your local laws. Overcrowding damages the property and can violate codes.
So strict screening is key. Then, once you've approved a great tenant, you need to lock down the administrative side to protect yourself legally.
Absolutely. Formalize everything. If they're approved but can't move in right away, say within 24 hours, require a non-refundable deposit to hold. Make it equal to 1 month's rent. This secures the property for them for a limited time, maybe 14 days maximum. If they don't sign the lease and move in by then, they forfeit that deposit. It shows they're serious.
Good idea. What about when they eventually decide to leave?
Written notice. Always require written notice to vacate. Many state laws require it anyway. Don't accept a casual phone call or text message. Use a formal notice to vacate form. This creates a clear paper trail and avoids any arguments later about when notice was actually given.
Makes sense. And there was one really simple but clever tip about the lease signing itself.
Ah, yes. Have the tenant initial every single page of the lease agreement. Every page.
Why every page?
It prevents them from ever claiming later, maybe in court during an eviction, that you added or changed pages after they signed the original agreement. If their initials are on every page, top and bottom, it proves they saw and acknowledged the entire document exactly as it was when they signed it. Simple trick, but powerful legal protection.
That's a great practical tip. Okay, let's shift gears dramatically. We've covered the nuts and bolts of deals and operations today. Now let's look at the historical context that shaped the very land and communities we invest in. Early American homes and suburbs. They didn't just spring up randomly, did they?
Not at all. For a long time after the Revolution, American architecture was basically just following English trends, Georgian style, the neoclassicism, Greek revival. These were dominant. And the idea of living outside the city center started surprisingly early, too.
Really?
Yeah, the sources mentioned that by 1860, in the biggest U.S. cities, it was already pretty common for the wealthiest folks, the urban elite, to commute a mile or even more from their sort of proto-suburban homes into the downtown business areas. The commute began early.
And this move outwards got a big boost during the Victorian era with a fascination for English cottage-style homes.
Absolutely. There was this hugely influential guy, Andrew Jackson Downing. He wrote a book in 1842 called Victorian Cottage Residences. It became like a pattern book, massively popular, shaping what Americans thought the ideal home and landscape should look like through the 1830s and 50s. The ideal shifted towards these picturesque, smaller, country-style houses, which really fueled that early suburban dream.
But eventually, America started developing its own distinct architectural style suited to different regions.
Right. That really started happening in the later part of the 19th century, say the 1880s, 1890s. You saw these truly indigenous American styles emerge. In the Northeast, you got the shingle style, lots of wood shingles covering everything, roof and walls, creating this unified, almost flowing look.
Okay.
Out in the Midwest, especially around Chicago, you had the prairie style emerge, most famously associated with Frank Lloyd Wright. Lots of strong horizontal lines, low-pitched roofs trying to blend in with the flat landscape.
And California?
Southern California gave rise to the Craftsman style, heavily promoted by people like Gustav Stickley through his magazine The Craftsman. That style emphasized natural materials, visible structural elements like exposed beams, built-in furniture, and a real focus on hand craftsmanship. So yeah, regional identities started to really express themselves architecturally.
But the story of American housing, particularly suburbs, isn't just about architecture. It's deeply intertwined with federal policy, especially policies that, frankly, enforced racial segregation. We have to talk about the post-World War II era.
Yes, you absolutely do. It's impossible to understand the layout of modern American cities and suburbs without understanding this. After WWII, the federal government got massively involved in housing finance. The Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, and the Veterans Administration, the VA together, they insured something like half of all new mortgages across the country.
Half. That's enormous influence.
Huge. And the critical point is, they didn't just insure loans neutrally. The FHA in particular had an official underwriting manual that explicitly laid out racially discriminatory policies.
This is where redlining comes in.
This is the institutionalization of redlining on a massive scale. The FHA manual literally warned against inharmonious racial or nationality groups in neighborhoods and stated that neighborhoods needed to be protected from them. They would deny federal mortgage insurance to builders who planned to sell homes to minorities in white areas.
So developers who wanted access to these cheap government-backed mortgages essentially had to build segregated communities?
Effectively, yes. Take William Levitt, the builder of the famous Levittowns, the archetypal post-war suburbs. He would have been refused FHA subsidies if he had chosen to sell homes to black families. The federal government, through the FHA and VA, used the power of finance to systematically create and enforce residential segregation across metropolitan America. The impact of that lasts to this day.
And it wasn't just federal policy. Private agreements, restrictive covenants, and deeds were also used.
Oh yeah, very commonly. These were clauses written directly into property deeds that prohibited the home from being sold to or occupied by black people and sometimes other minority groups as well. They were widespread.
Until the Supreme Court stepped in.
Right. In 1948, the Supreme Court ruled in Shelley v. Kramer that these racial restrictive covenants were legally unenforceable by courts. That was a landmark decision. However, the FHA didn't immediately stop insuring mortgages on properties with these covenants. They only announced they would stop doing so effective February 15, 1950. Some housing officials at the time basically said this delay acted like a warning bell for developers who hadn't yet filed restrictive covenants on their land, giving them a window of time to quickly get those discriminatory documents recorded before the FHA deadline kicked in.
So even after the court ruling, the system allowed segregationist practices to continue being embedded for a while longer?
Exactly. The inertia was powerful, and the resulting patterns of segregation profoundly shaped wealth-building opportunities, access to schools, and so much more for generations. It's a crucial part of the real estate landscape's history.
Absolutely crucial. Okay, let's zoom back into the city itself and look at its internal dynamics, drawing on the work of someone like Jane Jacobs. She had fascinating ideas about why some city districts thrive and others stagnate, often defying planners' intentions.
Jacobs was brilliant. Her core idea was that vibrant, successful city districts need complexity and diversity. They need a mix of old buildings and new, different types of businesses, different types of residences, all jumbled together. She argued that if you can understand a place at a single glance, if it's too orderly, too monotonous, with only one type of use, it's boring.
It offers no reason to linger, no reason for constant activity.
Exactly. That constant street life, the eyes on the street from people living and working there at all different times, that's what creates safety and connection. Vitality comes from that intricate mix of ingredients. Residential, commercial, industrial, cultural, all interacting. Planned monotony, she argued, kills that vitality.
She used that great comparison between Greenwich Village and Chelsea in New York, didn't she?
Yes. When the village became popular and property values rose, everyone expected the spillover to revitalize nearby Chelsea. which had similar housing stock and density. But it didn't happen, or happened much more slowly. Why? Jacobs argued it was the street grid.
The grid.
Chelsea was mostly laid out in long, straight, monotonous blocks, self-contained, isolating. Greenwich Village, especially the older parts, had shorter blocks, more intersections, crooked streets, a more intricate pattern that allowed for more mixing of uses and easier pedestrian flow. The vitality followed the path of the short blocks and mixed uses eastward, proving for Jacobs that the physical design and the diversity it enabled were more important than just the starting demographics.
That failure of top-down, simplistic planning connects directly to what some people call the new urban crisis today. There's a real irony in the current trend of cities becoming popular again, isn't there?
A huge irony. The very people moving back into cities, often affluent, educated professionals, are, in many ways, making those cities less traditionally urban and more suburban in character. They demand the amenities and comforts they were used to in the suburbs.
What kind of amenities?
Think about new luxury apartment buildings or condos in downtown areas. They compete by offering things like communal wine cellars, huge private fitness centers, rooftop decks with pools, maybe even dog spas, and, critically, massive internal parking garages. These are amenities designed for a more isolated, car-centric lifestyle, even within the dense city core.
And people are consuming more space, too.
Yeah, the sources point out that today's average urban household occupies almost as much space, nearly 1,700 square feet, as a typical suburban household at around 1,800 square feet. The space difference is shrinking rapidly. The idea of dense, efficient urban living is being eroded by the demand for suburban levels of space and private amenities.
So the very people driving the urban revival are kind of undermining some of the core characteristics and potential benefits of urban density.
In a way, yes, and this clustering of wealth and high education levels is also driving intense economic segregation. The data actually shows that economic segregation, the rich living separately from the poor, is worse in the biggest, densest, supposedly most progressive cities, especially those with large tech industries and lots of college grads.
Why is that?
Because the affluents are able to outbid everyone else for the most desirable locations, often in these new high-amenity zones. They cluster together, creating islands of wealth, which drives up housing costs citywide and makes it harder for lower and middle-income households to live near job centers or good schools. It's a paradox. The return to the city is creating new forms of inequality and separation within the city itself.
That's a really complex picture. Okay, let's shift to the highest level of finance now, looking at the kind of instruments and risks that played out in the lead up to 2008. The sources talk about Wall Street's magic solution for selling risky subprime mortgage bonds.
Yeah, magic is one word for it. Financial engineering might be more accurate, designed specifically to obscure risk. They started with these bundles of mortgages, sliced them up into bonds based on risk level. The safest slices were rated AAA, the riskiest were lower rated like BBB.
The ground floor of risk, as the sources put it.
Right. And those BBB bonds, packed with the riskiest subprime mortgages, were hard to sell on their own. So Wall Street came up with the CDO, the collateralized debt obligation.
And the trick was?
The trick was diversification, supposedly. They'd take, say, 100 different BBB bonds, each from a different pool of mortgages across the country, and bundled them together into a new CDO structure. Then they went to the rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, and argued, hey, these 100 bonds are diversified. What are the chances that homeowners in California and Florida and Ohio and Arizona all default at the same time?
But that diversification was flawed because they were all exposed to the same systemic risk, the overall U.S. housing market turning down.
Precisely. It was a fundamentally flawed assumption. But the rating agencies bought it, or at least went along with it. They took this pool of 100 inherently risky BBB bonds and declared that maybe 80% of the new CDO structure built from them was now suddenly AAA rated the safest rating possible. It was alchemy, turning lead into gold on paper.
How could the rating agencies justify that? It sounded like a massive conflict of interest was at play.
It was a glaring conflict of interest. The Wall Street banks pay the rating agencies huge fees to rate these complex products. Moody's and S&P made enormous profits from the structured finance boom. Their incentive was to keep the deals flowing, keep the fees coming in, not to be overly critical and potentially lose that lucrative business to a competitor who might be more lenient.
So they used overly optimistic models.
Dangerously optimistic models.
Yeah.
Models that assumed, for instance, that nationwide home prices could never fall simultaneously, which, of course, turned out to be catastrophically wrong.
And this whole house of cards relied on someone being willing to take on the ultimate risk, often through things like credit default swaps, CDSs.
Yeah, the CDS market exploded.
Yeah.
CDS is basically insurance on a bond. If the bond defaults, the seller of the CDS pays the buyer, but who could sell insurance on this scale, often with very little money down up front?
AAA-rated institutions.
Primarily, you needed that pristine credit rating to be seen as a credible counterparty. And ironically, one of the biggest sellers of CDSs on these subprime mortgage bonds, effectively insuring them against default, was the giant insurance company AIG, which is also AAA rated until it wasn't.
So the risk didn't disappear, it just got concentrated in supposedly too big to fail entities.
Exactly. And even for the people who saw the crash coming early, like Michael Burry, who famously shorted the market by buying CDSs, they found the game was rigged against them for a while.
How so?
Burry realized that the value of his CDS contracts the price he could theoretically sell them for, or the collateral he had to post, wasn't being set by an open market based on the rapidly deteriorating mortgage data. It was being set daily by the very Wall Street dealers like Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley who had sold him the swaps in the first place.
Mark-to-model pricing.
Right. Even as defaults were skyrocketing, the dealers' internal models kept the value of those risky bonds artificially high, and therefore the value of Burry's insurance, the CDSs, artificially low.
Right.
They didn't want to admit how bad things were getting on their own books. It shows how opaque these markets were and how powerful players could influence prices, at least for a time.
Wow. Okay, let's bring it back down to the individual investor level. We've seen the huge risks in complex finance. How do regular investors manage risk and maximize returns through more straightforward, but still crucial, tools like tax strategy and legal structure?
This is absolutely essential knowledge for any serious investor. And the first thing to understand is that the IRS treats different types of real estate activity very differently.
Like flipping versus holding rentals.
Exactly. If you're flipping houses, buying, fixing quickly, and selling for a profit, the IRS generally considers that active business income. You'll likely pay self-employment taxes, Social Security and Medicare, on top of regular income tax rates. Flippers can end up paying a higher overall tax rate than someone earning the same amount as a W-2 employee.
Ouch. But buy and hold rental investors get significant advantages. What's the biggest one?
The single biggest tax advantage is depreciation. It's often called a phantom expense or ghost expense.
Why phantom?
Because the IRS lets you deduct a portion of the value of the building, not the land, each year, theoretically accounting for its wear and tear over time. You get to deduct this expense on your tax return, reducing your taxable income, but you didn't actually spend that cash in that year.
So it's a paper loss that shields real cash flow from taxes.
Precisely. You could have positive cash flow hitting your bank account every month, but because of the depreciation deduction, your property might show a loss on paper for tax purposes. That means you could pay zero income tax on that rental income, legally. It's incredibly powerful.
That is huge. What else?
Well, when you eventually sell a long-term rental property that you've held for more than a year, any profit gain is typically taxed at the lower long-term capital gains rates, which are significantly lower than ordinary income tax rates.
Okay, lower taxes on the profit. What if you sell at a loss?
Here's another interesting quirk. If you sell a rental property at a loss, and remember, your basis for calculating gain or loss includes your purchase price, plus capital improvements minus accumulated depreciation, the loss is generally considered an ordinary loss, not a capital loss.
What's the difference?
Ordinary losses can be used to offset your ordinary income, like from your job, which is taxed at your highest marginal rate. Capital losses, on the other hand, are generally limited in how much ordinary income they can offset each year. So with rentals, you kind of get the best of both worlds. Long-term capital gains treatment on profits and ordinary loss treatment on losses. It's very favorable compared to, say, stocks.
That's a significant structural advantage. Then there's the ultimate tax deferral tool for scaling up, the 1031 exchange.
The 1031 exchange, section 131 of the tax code, it allows you to sell an investment property and defer paying any capital gains tax on the profit as long as you reinvest those proceeds into another like-kind investment property.
Like-kind, meaning another piece of real estate used for investment or business.
Generally, yes. You can exchange a rental house for an apartment building or raw land for a commercial property. The key is, you have to follow very strict rules and timelines.
What are the timelines?
They are absolute and unforgiving. From the day you close on the sale of your original property, the relinquished property, you have exactly 45 days to formally identify potential replacement properties in writing. And you must close on the purchase of one or more of those identified properties within 180 days from the original sale date.
45 days to identify, 180 days total to close, no exceptions.
No exceptions. If you miss either deadline, the exchange fails, and all the deferred capital gains tax becomes due immediately. It can be a disaster if you're not prepared. But if done correctly, it allows you to continuously trade up into larger properties, compounding your wealth without being eroded by taxes along the way.
Incredibly powerful for long-term growth. Okay, finally, let's quickly cover the essential legal structures for protecting yourself.
Asset Protection 101. Don't hold investment properties in your personal name if you can avoid it. Use a legal entity, typically a limited liability company, LLC, or sometimes a limited partnership, LP,
What?
to create separation. If something goes wrong at the property, say a tenant sues, they sue the LLC, not you personally. If the LLC's assets aren't enough to cover the judgment, your personal assets, your home, your savings, are generally protected. It creates a liability shield.
Crucial point. And timing matters for setting up the LLC.
Yes, the LLC must legally exist before it takes title to the property. So if you find a great deal and need to make an offer quickly, but your LLC isn't formed yet, you make the offer in the name of your name and/or assigns.
And/or assigns. What does that do?
That little phrase gives you the legal right to assign the purchase contract to another party, namely your newly formed LLC, just before the closing. So the LLC ends up being the official buyer on the closing documents and takes title directly.
Smart workaround. And when title is transferred, what kind of deed is usually used?
Typically, a grant deed or a warranty deed is used in most states. When a seller gives you a grant deed, they are essentially making two promises, or warranties. First, that they haven't already sold the property to someone else, and second, that the property is free from any liens or encumbrances that they created or knew about, unless specifically disclosed. It provides a level of assurance to the buyer about the quality of the title they're receiving.
Good to know. Last question. For listeners who want exposure to big commercial real estate office buildings, shopping malls, hotels, but don't want the hassle of direct ownership, what's the go-to vehicle?
That would be a REIT, a real estate investment trust. Think of REITs like mutual funds for real estate.
Yeah.
They own and often operate large portfolios of income-producing properties.
And you can buy shares easily.
Yeah, most REITs are publicly traded on major stock exchanges, just like regular stocks. They're very accessible, very liquid. Plus, they're legally required to pay out most of their taxable income, usually 90% or more to shareholders, as dividends. This avoids the double taxation that regular corporations face, taxed at the corporate level, and then again when dividends are paid to shareholders. So REITs can be a good option for income and diversification into large-scale real estate for the average investor.
Fantastic. That brings together strategy, finance, risk management, and even legal structure, a really comprehensive view. We have definitely covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with those absolute fundamentals of wealth building, focusing on buying assets that generate cash flow. Then we got into the nitty-gritty of operations, like why knowing the state of the plumbing or budgeting for flooring waste can make or break a rehab project. And we connected that ground level stuff to the really big picture, how historical policies like FHA redlining shaped our cities, or how Jane Jacobs's ideas about street grids still explain why some neighborhoods thrive and others don't.
And that connection, I think, is the ultimate point. Your success as an individual investor isn't just about your spreadsheet skills. It's fundamentally tied to understanding these larger systemic forces, historical, political, financial, that shape the environment you're investing in. Your property's value and security depend on much more than just the purchase price.
Which leads perfectly into our final provocative thought, something for you, the listener, to really chew on as you look at potential investments.
Yeah, think about this. We talked briefly about historical figures like Robert Moses in New York. Planners like him had almost unbelievable power in the mid-20th century. They controlled huge budgets. They decided where highways went, where parks were built, which neighborhoods got demolished. Moses could literally order the destruction of the New York Aquarium or run highways through parks because he controlled the financing and the land use authority. His vision fundamentally reshaped the city, creating value here, destroying it there, locking in patterns for decades.
Okay, so how does that connect to today?
Consider that those same kinds of power dynamics, maybe less centralized but still powerful, exist today in your local market. Think about the relationship between major real estate developers, big employers, and your local city council or planning commission. Who influences zoning changes? Who gets approvals for major projects? Whose vision for the future of your city is actually being implemented through land use decisions?
So understanding those local political and power dynamics is just as important as calculating ROI.
I'd argue it can be for the long-term security and potential of your investment. Knowing your cap rate is essential, but understanding whose interests are driving development, whose vision is shaping the infrastructure and zoning that will determine your property's future value, that's the next level of due diligence.
So the provocative question for you is, whose vision for the city are you actually buying into when you invest? Is it a vision based on sound economics and community benefit, or is it driven by less visible political or corporate interests?
And remember, mastery in this field, or any field, isn't something that just appears when you finally get a great result. It's built long before that. It's built in the moments you make the choice to do the hard work, the deep research, the persistent, informed actions necessary to become great long before the payoff is obvious.
Turn this knowledge into consistent, disciplined action. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.